Hi, my name is Lyla and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're looking at the equipment that helped me go from a noob to a commission painter. So I've written 2 blog posts on this topic, one at the 1-year mark and one at the 1.5-year mark, and now we're at the 2-year mark. So I've been a commission painter for about 1.5 years at this point. And although a lot of my progress has been because of my skill, I can't deny the importance of my equipment. All of the equipment that I'm going to be talking about in this video will be listed down below. They might be affiliate links, not all of them will be, but some of them will be. So if you don't want to purchase through affiliate links, you can just open a new window, search the title, and buy it that way. Otherwise, purchasing through affiliate links is what helps keep this channel going. So the blog posts that I have written have been far and above my most popular blog posts, so I thought I would make a video about it as well. So if you've seen this video, you don't need to go read the blog post unless you're interested in skipping ahead, because this is going to be a series. However, there is going to be slightly updated material in these videos that is not on my blog posts. So the first thing we're going to talk about is brushes, and brushes are extremely important. If you've ever looked at pictures or YouTube videos and seen the tiny details that these artists are painting and thought to yourself, there's absolutely no way that I could get that, you are probably not using the right brush. I have tried several brands and types of paintbrushes. I have tried synthetic brushes from my local craft store. I've tried synthetic brushes from the hobby brands like Citadel and Army Painter, and all the way up to the Kolinsky Sable hair brushes that are Rosemary as well as Windsor Newton. And over this time, I have definitely learned a lot. And after hours upon weeks upon months, and 100 miniatures later, Windsor Newton is far and above my favorite. So Windsor Newton brushes are expensive, like $20 expensive, but to me they're absolutely worth it. I paint 2 to 5 hours a day, every day. And when I was using synthetic brushes, I could go through a brush a week, just because I paint so much. It is an inevitability that synthetic brushes will begin to curve. And perhaps you can trim that curve off, but eventually it's just going to keep happening. It's just part of what the plastic is. When it comes to my Windsor Newton brushes, I usually end up getting rid of them because they start going bald. That's how resilient they are. Those tips are still strong and trying, even though there's only 12 bristles keeping it together at this point. Unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation when it comes to synthetic brushes, although Creature Caster's customer service is fantastic. But I go through synthetic brushes so quickly that they're just not worth it to me. So if you have a recommendation for synthetic brush, please leave it in the comments so that other people can see what brushes you use and love. My second favorite brush line is Raphael. They're in the $15 range. They're definitely good, but the bristles don't have the same spring. Eventually, they start to lose that tip, and it just becomes more and more difficult to work with. My go-to brushes are the Windsor Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable Hair Watercolor Brush Round number 1 and number 0. One thing you want to be aware of is that your brush isn't too small. Finding the right brush has less to do with the size of the brush and everything to do with the size of the point. If you're using a smaller brush, the paint is more likely to dry on the paintbrush before it even gets to your miniature. So I recommend using a bigger and thicker brush that can hold more paint so that it stays wet and working longer. I on and off use the Brush Master Preserver and Cleaner, but my go-to cleaning routine is just cleaning them with dish soap. I use Stynylrez primer from Badger Air. I like this primer because it's gray and it can be applied with an airbrush or with a paintbrush. The gray is important to me because when I am doing my zenithal highlighting, it's sort of an intermediary step. I can do my blacks from below, my whites from above, and I sort of already have this transitionary color with the gray primer. Depending on how smooth you want the transition to be, of course you can add gray and intermediary mixes of black and white till you get the perfect gradation. But if I'm in the mood to cheat, the gray primer works just fine. I use this primer on my metal miniatures, my plastic miniatures, and my resin miniatures. Another reason that I like this primer is because if for some reason a model chips, I can paint this primer on with a paintbrush and then paint right over it. When I first began painting, I was using Citadel. Today I use mostly Fantasy and Game, Scale Color by Scale 75, and Reaper paints. So what paint I use has to do with what technique I'm doing. Fantasy and Game is rather on the thin side. Scale 75 is a lot thicker and more opaque along the lines of Citadel, and Reaper is in between. I go a little more in depth in this video, so check that out to learn more about paint consistency. If you want to know about other paint brands like Chimera or Vallejo, I don't know, I haven't used them, but if you want a review, feel free to send me some. Over the past 6 months or so, I've been using and loving inks. If you want to add an extra pop of color to your miniatures, inks are a great way to go about that. I also use my inks very, very frequently in my airbrush because they can be used to thin down paint but still keep that same intensity and color. I talk about going over zenithal highlights with a mixture of inks and paints as well as just paints and just inks in this video here. To thin my paints, I use a mixture of thinner and glaze medium from Vallejo. You can get them at your local craft store as well as from Amazon. I use this mixture because the glaze medium extends my drying time, which is especially important when I'm doing things like wet blending and feathering. I've tried using retarder, but I have found that retarder just sort of thickens up my paint and it doesn't blend as well. So I highly recommend using glaze medium if you're having difficulty keeping your paint wet and working for long enough. Also, some paints like Citadel washes leave a very glossy finish to your miniatures. I prefer my miniatures to be matte, so if the last step I'm doing is a wash, I'll go ahead and use a matte medium and paint that over top to give a more matte texture. I like my miniatures to be matte because I think it makes them look more realistic. And if I've gone through all of this time and effort to paint in those intricate highlights and non-metallic metal, I'm not letting gloss detract from that. And lastly, for my sealant, I use Tester's Dull Coat. To go along with paintbrush size, if you're having difficulty painting really intricate details, make sure that you're using the right paint consistency. Paint should flow off your brush easily. If you're having a difficult time, it might be because your paint is too dry. If your paint is completely running off of the paintbrush and pooling, you have too much liquid. Something I can't work without is a wet palette. It has made such a big difference in my painting. Oh, you're gonna fall off, honey. Wet palette helps keep your paint wet and working for longer. Imagine coming back to a project and having your paint still be working hours, days, or even weeks later. I use parchment paper in my wet palette, which definitely has its downsides. I have found that it doesn't keep my paint wet for as long, and I am constantly adding more water. However, it's cheaper and easier to find than the actual wet palette paper. However, wet palette paper can be reused, and I have noticed that it keeps my paint wet for longer. I'm actually considering ordering more wet palette paper to see if I actually like it better. So I'll let you know what I decide, but for the moment, I'm pretty happy with the parchment paper. Lighting is not to be underestimated when you're painting, and I don't mean object source lighting, I mean the literal light that you are using to look at your miniature. If you can't see your miniature, you can't paint it well, and this is true for both intensity as well as color. Oh, there you go, that's a good point. All light has a color temperature. For example, tungsten lights are orange, fluorescent lights are a bluish green, and LED lights are often blue. This can greatly affect how you are seeing your miniature. I prefer using blue LED lights because I think that they are the most pure, but your opinion may vary. I use this Bright Tech Light View light, although this light isn't required. I asked for this light for Christmas because it came with a magnifying glass. However, I quickly realized that in order to be within proper focal distance, I end up hitting the light with my brush. So now I just use it as a light. In my office, I also have this under cabinet LED light, which I was disappointed to find out is actually a warm color and not the blue that I prefer to work with. But I decided that I didn't want to wait to send it back and get a new one, so I'm using it. But ideally, it would be the same blue. I also recently bought this little USB charged LED reading light, which is also that same warmish color, but we're not going to talk about that. Another important element that might seem obvious, but took me a while to realize, is having good quality miniatures. Of course, this isn't mandatory. If you're an amazing painter and you have a great paintbrush and great paint, you can make any miniature work. But if you want to make this easy, have a high quality miniature. And I specifically mean one with the eyes sculpted on, not one of those white boned miniatures that just has the concave surface for where the general eye socket is. And especially with Reaper's new Blackline, there's no excuse for not having good miniatures. A few of my favorite places to order miniatures from is Dark Sword, the Reaper's Blackline or their metal line, Raging Heroes, and Kingdom Death. I've also had great luck with Nocturna models and the monsters from WizKids. For Christmas, I got the Pashi TG3F double action gravity feed airbrush from my family. And when I first got it, I just knew that I needed to paint my miniatures faster. But I didn't realize how big of an impact it was actually going to have on my miniature painting, especially as someone who works off of commissions. It definitely speeds up my workflow. Zenithal highlights makes a huge difference. And overall, I just am really in love with my airbrush. Obviously, it's not something you need, but if you want to get serious about miniature painting, I highly recommend getting an airbrush. So you don't want to just be willy-nilly touching your models. The oils from your fingers can get on your models and either rub paint off or make it so that paint doesn't stick in the first place. I use and love this hobby holder. What I really like about this is how ergonomical it is to use. I like to flip it upside down and then I can rest my hand on the handle to paint eyes, and the extended grip that I have makes it very comfortable to hold. As an added bonus, when I went to the hobby holder table at Adepticon, they knew who I was. It was like the best 15 seconds of fame that I've ever experienced. And I know they knew who I was because we talked about the model that I had posted that morning and how interesting they thought the color contrast was. And so it was just really exciting and really cool for me. So I'm slightly biased, but I do actually really like this implement and think that you should get one too. My last bit of equipment are these magnifying glasses. And I bought these on Amazon and they definitely help give me that extra edge when I need to paint something extremely small and detailed. These are the MagniPro LED magnifying glasses. And the frames are incredibly cheap. You can definitely tell that you get what you pay for, but the lenses are what the important part is. And the lenses are actually pretty impressive. They have several different magnifications, and the focal length is at the perfect distance for painting. So now that you've heard about my equipment, what is the first thing that you're gonna go out and buy? What thing do you think you're missing in your arsenal that is keeping you from creating great miniatures? Now, don't get me wrong, time and practice is extremely important. Getting this equipment isn't going to magically make you a better painter. But if you're using the wrong equipment, you're just making it harder on yourself. So while you're on the computer, use those links down below, buy yourself a Christmas present, and then go paint more miniatures.